guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
Okay, welcome back everyone. Thanks for listening again to Anonymous Bites Back. Another Free Assange special after days of different hearings. Sort of the start of the big court case about the extradition of Assange to the United States. We're going to have to report on this again, give an observation, and bring you the news, the updates regarding this. I want to ask you to please share, because that's what we depend on. You guys know that we are facing shadow bans on different social media, so we depend on you guys to help us with that. Please share it around and invite your friends to listen. Thank all of you for returning every time and supporting us. We got a special guest in tonight. She knows a lot about it, and she also went to the scene. Her name is Deepa Govindarajan Driver. I hope I pronounced it okay.
Perfect.
No, thanks. Yeah. Now I know you also did like a speech there, and you went to the scene there. So maybe you want to just give your impression about what went on, like what did you witness there, and how did you feel about it?
So we've had 5 days, or rather we're expecting to have 5 days of trial. 4 days are over. For those viewers who are, or listeners who are listening into this, I would strongly recommend following Craig Murray, the former British ambassador to Uzbekistan, who is himself also a whistleblower. He is posting quite a detailed account every day online, and he gives a good understanding of what's happening day by day inside the court. As many of you will know, there are very, very few spaces for the general public in the court. There is a press annex for the press people. This is separate from the courtroom. So there are some people, press people, in the courtroom, and about 60 spaces available in the press annex, which is I believe in a separate section. So there they have a video link to the main courtroom. My impression when I went only on Monday. I have not been able to go every day. But when I went on Monday, I was quite surprised because I have not been to Belmarsh before. Belmarsh is pretty much feels like it's in the middle of nowhere, because I went I went by train to Plumstead Station. There is a direct bus if anybody's intending to go tomorrow. But once you get there, it really feels quite deserted. It almost feels like you're in the middle of an industrial estate. And then just outside, we had some quite loyal supporters queuing up with tents and stuff overnight. Others had queued since about 4:35 or 6 in the morning. They said to me that they had queued since dawn, so I assume about that time. And there were 16 spaces, I believe, for the public in the public gallery. These spaces were, of course, what was needed to be done was that people like Craig, people like Kristen, other people who not only are close to Julian but also provide a good account to the public should be in there, because, as many of you know, the mainstream press has been really terrible about covering the Julian Assange case, whether it was in the initial administrative hearings, where I remember queuing up outside Westminster Magistrates Court quite a few times, and I was, I don't know, fortunate or unfortunate enough to get in. And what struck me was the fact that whenever supposedly these press people who were there went inside and took down what was going on, not one of them chose to be critical or to engage with what was really going on, even at Westminster Magistrates Court. As you probably know, what is happening at Belmarsh Magistrates Court is under the purview of Westminster Magistrates Court, because Westminster Magistrates Court is the only extradition court in England and Northern Ireland, I believe. And so all the extradition cases go through that court. What also struck me when I reached that place was it was quite interesting. The gates of the court were already closed, and there were police outside, and all the supporters who were there, a bunch of them had managed to get in. And I think once the police realized that there were going to be quite a few more, they closed the gates so that others couldn't get in. So the press, a small number of supporters, and others were waiting in the courtyard of the court, and the rest of us were all outside the big gates. It was quite clear that they were not really interested, although the police were friendly, they were not really interested in making sure that we were safe or anything else. They were doing it to make sure that they have a slightly cordial relationship with us, but essentially their role is to keep us back, and that was quite obvious. They then started having these metal barriers which they were throwing down from not the police themselves. They had organized a private company to put down metal barriers down the side so that they could keep the driveway free for people to drive in and things. But again, what was interesting was the company that was doing the metal barriers was literally throwing down the metal barrier, and on the back of one caught me on the head, even though I was safely on the pavement and I was talking to somebody, and suddenly I felt this piece of metal hit me on the head. And I then went and tried to make a complaint with the police officer. And what I was very surprised about was that his response to me was, "Oh, I did see it happening, and it was an accident, so I can't really do anything about it. You know it was an accident." And I said to him, "Well, isn't there a duty for you, if you're the police officers who are asking for this to be put down, to not be negligent and to make sure there are enough people to lift it down so that it doesn't hurt somebody?" Anyway, this is going very far away from the case, but what I'm trying to say is that the situation is not one that is welcoming for supporters, but there is a core bunch of very active supporters who have been by Julian's side right since 2010 outside the Ecuadorian embassy and recognizing what was going on, who are there. There's also other hangers-on and people who really feel quite concerned about the loss of free speech and loss of freedom of expression that comes from the case of Julian Assange. Because, for me, the case is centered around four things. One is the collusion of three states in the intentional torture of an individual. So, in this, I'm seeing Britain, America, and Ecuador colluding to torture Julian. The second is a complete and utter disregard for international law. And those of you who have been following the work of Professor Niels Meltzer, the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture and Arbitrary Detention, will know that the British government have shown absolute disregard for everything that Niels says, because they don't respond effectively to any of his any of what he has written to them. The third area, which is a complete and utter disregard for British law, including Julian's right to a free trial, to a free and fair trial, and Julian's right to privacy. As many of you know, while he was in the Ecuadorian embassy, he was spied on by a private security firm which was ostensibly there to protect him, but was actually spying on him, using all kinds of devices to spy not just on him and his friends talking about various things, not just on what WikiLeaks was doing, but also on privileged legal conversations between Julian and his lawyers, and providing this information to people within the security services in America. And this creates a situation where Julian there is absolutely no way he can get a fair trial. And then, of course, there is the thing under British law and under international law about the prevention of torture. And Julian has been consistently tortured. He was smeared for 7.5 years while he was in the Ecuadorian embassy by people who said, "Oh, you could go. Why don't you go and face your charges in Sweden? Why don't you just, if you are that honest, why don't you just come out and face the consequences of what you've done in Sweden?" Without recognizing that prior to this, Julian had already offered to be interviewed in Sweden, as long as they confirmed that they would not allow that opportunity to be used as an excuse for onward rendition to America. And what's interesting is that the Swedish refused to give that assurance. Also, he offered to be interviewed by video link. He even offered to be interviewed in person. And as we know from the Freedom of Information requests from Stefania Maurizi, which are available through her La Repubblica article, you can see all the information she got. The Crown Prosecution Service was actively involved in pressurizing the Swedish investigation to stay open when they wanted to close it. And there were issues on the Swedish side as well, where when Marianne Ny was in charge, it was very obvious that they saw it as almost like co-conspirators between Paul Close in Britain and Marianne Ny there, in making sure this case remained open and they would get Assange as a suspect. And what was interesting was, not long before Assange was asked to give these assurances, Sweden had acted as a conduit for onward rendition of other citizens. So Assange was not imagining the kind of dangers he was in. And of course, there was the other danger in Britain, that if he ever left the embassy, what has happened to him now would happen. And the other thing they kept saying is, "Oh, you're paranoid that you're being spied on. Oh, you're completely crazy." Of course, these things don't happen. There is something called the rule of law. What is interesting is that Britain not just spent a huge amount of money. The mayor of London is always talking about how tight finances are in London in order to provide basic services for our citizens who are living homeless or other services. But what they were able to spend on was a huge amount of money for the police to intimidate and supposedly guard Julian Assange outside the Ecuadorian embassy. So, um, so this is a conspiratorial case, and then you have the issues of, I guess, a sense that the US is having an absolute extraterritorial overreach. Um, they are seeking to prosecute in the US under US law without First Amendment protections, which is a protection which is offered to ensure that the government is not free from criticism or cannot clamp down on criticism. So, without those First Amendment protections, somebody who's a non US citizen undertaking activity that is largely legal in another state. So, this is like, if it was North Korea and Kim Jong un saying, okay, somebody in America has received a leak from North Korea, maybe from a defector or from somebody else, and now I want to render that person back to North Korea to stand trial. And as you know, if Julian is extradited to America, he faces 175 years in prison. He'll be treated he will be in court in the Eastern District of Virginia, where the significant majority of jurors, not the people who act on the jury, will be drawn from security services, and where in this particular court, where never a case has been won in favor of the person who's being accused. So this is a show trial, both here and in America, and it is clear from Craig's accounts of what is going on in court. Julian, on the first day, was handcuffed 11 times, body searched twice. His papers, his confidential papers that her lawyers had given him to prepare for the next day, were taken away from him. And while he is in the courtroom, he is in a sealed glass box, accompanied by 2 security guards, which means that he has no privacy. The American government has had 10 years to prepare for this case. Julian does not even have the opportunity to speak to his lawyers throughout the earlier proceedings. We know that Julian was unable to speak to his lawyers, unable to get the advice he needed, because they kept saying they didn't have space in Belmarsh prison. And when this was raised with the judge, she said, "Oh, it's not my problem. You have to raise it with the prison service." So, it does feel very much like a situation where there is no hope. And if we did not believe in hope, if we did not believe in truth, if we did not believe that the truth has the power to set us free, many of us would not be listening either to this podcast or trying to continue doing this work. But we do believe. So that's my little update, if that helps.
Perhaps
Absolutely.
I can.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Perhaps I can give some hope, because you can clearly see what they're doing to him, and that they are in need to have such an advantage over him, that they are actually scared to go on an equal level against him, who has actually got the truth on his side. And you mentioned the whole torture thing. That's how it already started, with the whole smear campaign, to have their victim be smeared as a racist, and to actually as a rapist, sorry, and to actually
Yeah.
have his private life in the embassy being like recorded to just to make him look bad eventually, right? And then you mentioned the company, and we can safely mention the name, that is UC Global was capturing everything that was going on and delivering it to the Americans. And just the fact that they need such an advantage over a journalist also shows that they are somewhat fearsome, right? They fear. So
You mean fearful? Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I think the other thing that is worth pointing out is that, in terms of due process, if you look at the overseeing, the senior magistrate in that court who's overseeing Julian's case, There are three very good articles written by the group called Declassified UK. It's a historian, Mark Curtis, and his colleague Matt Kennard. They have examined the conflicts of interests of the senior judge overseeing the case, Judge Emma Arbuthnot, and they have published information to show that both her husband and her son have deep connections with the security state. Her husband is featured, I believe, 63 or 67 times in WikiLeaks. And none of this information was disclosed, and it is not clear that any investigation has subsequently taken place to ensure that no conflicts of interest affect this case.
Yeah, that's correct. Her husband was MI5. I remember looking at that, and I just wanted to add to everything that you said, and I'm not sure if you brought it up or not, as I just came on. The case in court, Julian Assange's lawyer actually argued in court that the UC Global and the CIA were trying to attempting to kidnap Julian Assange and potentially kill him. And it's an insane situation where we have the U.S. working with Spanish intelligence contractor UC Global, or Ecuadorian contractor, where they are trying to watch Julian. Well, they were watching Julian. They were surveilling him the whole time, but they were also working with the U.S. and they plotted to kidnap Julian, which is insane that a UN country would even think to do that.
Oh yeah, exactly. I mean, it just shows how little regard they have for, how little respect they have for. It seems Deepa has a problem with hearing us.
Oh, I can hear you now. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know it shows the little respect they have for Julian, and the
Exactly.
same. Yeah, they would probably treat other journalists the same if they get their way after this. Now, yeah, go ahead. Add your point, Deepa. Of course.
I just wanted to quickly say that I wanted to bring to everybody's attention, if you have contacts with any retired or current judges, retired or current lawyers, retired or current legal academics, and stakeholders within the British justice system, we have put together a letter by international jurists signed by some very prominent jurists, including Nancy Hollander, Robert Thibault, Julian Burnside in Australia, some very big French names, including Eva Joly, and all these people have come together to sign a letter detailing the breaches in the rule of law. And it is just astonishing when you look at that list of things that have gone wrong. And I urge you to ask other international jurists to please add their name to the letter, senior jurists. We need to let the British justice system know that you guys outside Britain are looking very closely at them and looking at their behaviour, because it is important that public pressure is put on creating more scrutiny in a system where pretty much anything goes, it looks like. Anything that will work against Julian is allowed, anything that is supporting Julian is disallowed. So we really need, if there are a number of subscribers listening to this, please help us to get the letter out. I will provide the link to this group, and I don't know if you have a way of disseminating it. I'd be very grateful if you could.
Yeah, and about that, so the Americans claimed that the British should not argue just on the extradition treaty because they said it conflicts with domestic UK law, and they have to hold domestic UK law above this treaty because else it would jeopardize the sovereignty of the British Parliament. Now, we were discussing about this, and also I posted about this too. Actually, the British government accepted this extradition treaty that contains an exception for political extraditions. It doesn't directly say political prisoners can't be extradited, but it says they are not forced to extradite political prisoners. It has to be judged in another way by another body, by another legal body. Um, so in America said like, yeah, but UK domestic law has to be above that. But the UK law actually ratified this whole extradition treaty, and what they also said, like the defense should actually argue that this extradition treaty is now part of UK law, of domestic law. It is embedded in the domestic law, and it is the same thing. Uh, it is not separate because it's accepted by the UK legal bodies. And then when it gives this extra exception for political extraditions, then we have the fact that the UK also signed the treaties with the European Council, the European Human Rights Council, for example, that does attempt to stop political prisoners from being extradited. So what you're saying is a very good point, especially for lawyers from the from countries who are part of the European Council, to actually join you with this, you guys with this letter, to speak out about this, because the UK did sign agreements, and they should be held to account because of that.
Yes, absolutely. I think there are a number of good reasons why British jurists should be taking this very seriously. But as you know, Julian has been smeared so badly that many people lack the courage to say anything at all, including senior jurists. And it would be good if the international community, which can, in a way, move away from the mess and actually see what's going on, if they would offer support and offer scrutiny at this time. As you know, people like Claire Daly from Ireland, Mick Wallace, an MEP, and Sevim Dagdelen, another MEP, they are part of a European MEP delegation who are acting as witnesses, not witnesses, but overseeing what is happening in the process, like observers. And that creates a sense that there will be some accountability for this, because very few British politicians are taking a stand against this. Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell have only more recently been more clear about their position. And of course, Richard Bergen has been clear for a very long time. But the Tory establishment is clearly not at all interested in helping Assange or supporting him. That is quite obvious, because it is very difficult for this question. Chris Williamson, when he was MP, tried to get this issue discussed in Parliament, and he wasn't even able to get it on the agenda. So it is a time when other nations which have something of a semblance of rule of law should help us to regain as citizens our freedoms in some ways.
It certainly seems like you said earlier, that the stage is set and it's a show trial, and that the UK has already kind of made a deal with the US to extradite Julian, despite a court case never even happening yet. So it certainly seems that way.
I was also going to say that, you're talking about one of the things that people were talking about was this idea that the extradition treaty is not in the law. But if you look at the exchange of notes between the Home Office and the Embassy of the United States of America, which is on page 16 of the treaty, it says the United Kingdom has completed the steps necessary under its law to implement the 2003 treaty in the United Kingdom.
Exactly.
So it's unbelievable that now the argument is being made is while he will be extradited under the extradition treaty, they will not use the treaty as the basis for the legal arguments. Something else will be used, like broader extradition law, and this is just anything they can do to get Julian Assange convicted, rather than fair process. Sorry, you were going to say.
No, I was just saying, yeah, I was agreeing with you. That's all I was saying. But I mean, I'll add to that and say that if you know the Palantir plan that was years ago leaked from WikiLeaks, it basically said drag Julian Assange and any WikiLeaks employees around from court to court, facing legal challenges in each country for the next 10, 15 years or something like that. I'm paraphrasing it. But
is that the Stratfor kind of exchange?
Yes. Yeah, it's the Stratfor Palantir plan. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I remember that well.
Yeah, and we had Rico in yesterday, another journalist, and he said maybe in fact they know they can't win this in the end, but this is actually the punishment, right? To treat him as bad as possible, to discourage other journalists, and to show the world and what happens when you expose certain things. And
yeah, I think the idea is to, I would say the main objective is to break him down, and to, in various ways, one, isolate him as they did before, but now it is about taking away from him any shred of humanity that is there for somebody who is, and this is a completely utterly horrific experience for somebody who is an immensely intelligent person. When he went into the prison, they lost his glasses for 3 months, his reading glasses, so he wasn't able to even read stuff. So this kind of arbitrary and unnecessary and cruel and degrading treatment is what Professor Neil Smeltzer is saying time after time that Britain shouldn't do, and yet that's what's going on.
And then you had the judge the other day say that they can't do anything. She said she can't do anything about it.
About the treatment in prison, I believe that's what she said. I wasn't in the room, but Craig's account says very clearly. Maybe you weren't there at the start of the show. I was encouraging people to look at Craig Murray, the former British ambassador to Uzbekistan and well-known whistleblower. He's putting out a post every day, which he has freely given permission for everyone to translate and use in their own jurisdictions for news publishing houses to use. And it's a very detailed account of what goes on day by day. If you read the day 1 proceedings and day 2 proceedings and you do not feel very angry, then I'm astounded. Day 3 was a bit more technical. There were some things which were not so technical, but day 1 and 2, it is very clear what's really going on in that court. And of course, everybody wants to be respectful of the court, and that's how we expect it to be within a fair justice system. We don't just complain about something just because we do not like the outcome. But this is not about complaining about something when we don't like the outcome. It is just atrocious that what the court says defendants' basic rights they are allowed. For example, privileged conversations with lawyers, ability to consult with lawyers and take advice, having basic adjustments made for people with disabilities or mental health difficulties, For example, instead of sticking Julian in this glass box, there is prior precedent of even a far-right racist being allowed to sit in the well with his lawyers. And there are several, examples of adjustments being made. Yet when Julian couldn't hear from inside the box, the argument was made by the judge, I believe, that this was because of noise outside the court from the supporters. And supporters were told, oh, you've got to quiet down. And everybody was sniggering about it and saying, oh, look at Julian is having to tell his supporters to pipe down. But actually what Julian was trying to say was he couldn't hear because he's locked in a box. And he can't read his papers without the two guards seeing it. When he goes to confer, you don't know whether the room is bugged. So the Americans have sight of everything he's discussing with his lawyers. He is not sitting next to his lawyers, so he can't easily discuss with them when there's a relevant point. What is the point of having him? That's what the question he asked. What is the point of having him in the courtroom and saying to him, "Is everything okay?" when actually you don't care what his answer is?
Yeah, that's very true.
So and then you have Julian there in that box, right? But how did you feel when they actually told Kristin to leave, the current editor? They told him to leave the courtroom, right? And he later he came back, but they kind of like pushed him out.
I was at an event on Sunday. Well, maybe it was Monday. Sorry, the days are blurring. Where Craig spoke and a number of other speakers spoke. But before this event started, I was talking to a gentleman who was who came up and he said, "Oh, they thought I was Kristen Hrafnsson, so they came up to me and asked, 'Are you Kristen Hrafnsson?' And I said, 'No, that's the guy.' And they went up to him and said, 'Are you Kristen Hrafnsson? We're going to exclude you from the court.' So Kristen hadn't actually done anything for him to be excluded. It was clear they were after somebody with the name Kristen Hrafnsson. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing the name right, but
no,
essentially...
I was sticking to the first name only too, like it made it easier.
Yeah, he has a tricky surname just like mine, but presumably if you make an effort, you can pronounce, all of us can pronounce it. I should learn the name properly. But it must be, he's a very mild-mannered man.
Oh,
He's a
yeah.
very understated, mild-mannered man. So it's very interesting to understand why it is that, I mean, I cannot understand what they're worried about when they're searching Julian so much or when they're trying to exclude Kristen. What is it that is going on that they're worried that he will have access to? Or is it just, a show of strength and a show of power and a distraction from the actual facts of the case? Because, everybody starts talking about Kristen, it's just like a little bit like what Trump and others do. They do, and Boris Johnson do. They do these absolutely bizarre acts or say something completely outrageous, and everybody talks about what's happening, what they're saying and how outrageous it is, and they don't pay attention to the things they are really getting through the system, which are so detrimental and so harmful to the rest of us. So that discussion doesn't happen. And the media have a hook, which they can be flaky and superficial and they can engage with that hook, but they won't engage with the primary issue, which is, why is a publisher and a journalist in a maximum security prison alongside terrorists and those who have committed serious crimes? Why is he accused of jumping bail when actually the Swedish offences were never charged? He should not have been, tagged and the red notice given or anything else done. And why is that Swedish investigation then dropped in such a way that it is time for the American request to come in? This is all just a nonsense. It's a charade, and that's what we should be talking about.
Of course, but that's why I'm also sad that like the large media are even complicit in taking this out of context. Like For example, I was listening to there's like the national radio broadcaster in my country. It's like the largest broadcasting station, radio station in the Netherlands. Like I'm from the Netherlands, right? And they were repeating the accusations about how Julian Assange hacked into the United States government, exposed the secrets. They were not repeating the facts of the defense that he was only a publisher. He was a journalist. He didn't do any of this himself. The files can be delivered to WikiLeaks. Any file can be dropped to WikiLeaks, and they will just check the validity of these files, and they will publish it. They were not involved in any of these things. So the media is just repeating the accusations as if these were facts, and they're not repeating the defense at all. And that.
What's interesting? Sorry, I beg your pardon.
Okay, no, well, real quick, because I'm shocked about this, because it is actually about their freedom. It is not just about Assange, it is about them, actually.
Yeah, what is also interesting was Craig has reported that in the first half of the day, the journalists' wing, when the prosecution was making their case, was full. But afterwards, when the defense was making their case, many of the mainstream journalists weren't there. I know there were some journalists who didn't even manage to get in before 12 o'clock because of issues with the way the British justice system access was being denied to some of them. But this is ridiculous that you listen to only the prosecution's arguments, because it is great. One of the things that came out in court was, WikiLeaks information was found in Osama bin Laden's cave, among other papers. Now, maybe Osama bin Laden printed off pieces of paper from the BBC, maybe he printed it off from Sky or any other national paper. Does that mean that then they are all responsible for what you allege Osama bin Laden did? I mean, it's just outrageous. So the idea that everybody is saying, oh, yes, in the British media, Assange's stuff was found and some of Osama bin Laden's assistants had sent some information to him about what was in WikiLeaks. What is this? I mean, we know for a fact that nobody was hurt or harmed as a result of WikiLeaks. But we know for an absolute certain fact that the war crimes that took place undertaken by Britain and America were undertaken. And it's not just a risk that happened. It's something that, the risk crystallized. It was not something might happen. Thousands of people died. Thousands of people were raped, murdered, tortured. That's what we should be talking about.
I just want to add to that Julian was actually redacting names from those documents. And it was The Guardian and, God, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, Luke Harding, who published in a book the password for the cables. So, they're going after Julian Assange for publishing unredacted cables. That's not true. He was the one redacting it, and I think his name's Mark Davis, a journalist in Australia. Yeah. He said that that Julian Assange was the only one that was taking precaution to redact names, and everybody else was laughing it off. So it's insane that they're going after Julian, saying that his publications killed people when, they already admitted in the Manning trial that nobody died. The Pentagon said that in the trial itself. So it's crazy to me. It's crazy. And nobody reprints and says that it was The Guardian who published the password. It's absolutely, I'm just mind blown.
And I mean, this is irrespective of all of this. We're talking about passwords, we're talking about Kristen. What we should be talking about is, why are the architects of these war crimes, Bush, Blair, their mates, all the big warmongering politicians, why are they still roaming free? Why aren't they at The Hague? Why is it that we're not talking about their crimes? And it's just the media is manufacturing a kind of passivity amongst people, first by making it very difficult for people to support Julian, and now that the charges have been dropped, by not covering it at all.
we invaded Iraq based off of a forged report called the Downing Street Report that was literally just academic papers that were copy pasted together, and that alone should have been a crime um, to manipulate people into a war, but it wasn't. And they continued on pushing this narrative that there was weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and yeah, it's insane. Like Bush and Blair, they actually planned the invasion of Iraq 1 year prior, according to Hillary Clinton's emails, and WikiLeaks highlighted that. So it, it's crazy.
Mm. So
Yeah.
I mean, I just think it's worth encouraging everybody who's online to phone into radio shows, mainstream radio shows, mainstream phone-ins on television programs, write letters which get published in national newspapers, which, I mean, obviously the letters to the editor will be screened out, but at least phone calls and stuff where drive time shows, and make a noise about what is happening. This should not be allowed. This should not take place. Please use whatever resources you have to help us get this man out of prison, because he should be free. We need to make sure that the judicial process is run by people who are fair and who don't have conflicts of interest. So I'd really urge everybody to put their attention in writing to the judicial experts they know and encourage them to influence the system, really. Because whether they are on the right or the left, a lot of people believe in free speech. A lot of people believe in your right to due process in a trial. A lot of people believe in the system, which is run in a fair way.
The thing is,
So
Deepa, whether they believe in it or not, they're going to lose it if they don't fight for this. So even if they
yeah,
believe in free speech, yeah, they don't believe it, they will lose it anyway. Like they're not going. Yeah, this will set such a precedent that it will be too late then to do anything about it. So they have to act now. So
that's right.
yeah,
On so many different levels too, from human rights to journalism. It'll
To
set so many
environmental
different.
activism. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Sorry.
Daryl, go ahead.
I was just going to say, imagine you're an Extinction Rebellion activist. You find out that one of these big companies has been poisoning the water, and that big company has some links back to the US or to another big state. Do you really want to be extradited because you've revealed some secrets? So many of us are activists on various causes. We may not care about what is happening to Julian Assange, but we may care about the environment, we may care about hospitals, we may care about schools. Do we not have a right as citizens to understand the crimes committed by our governments in our name? The crimes committed by big and powerful people, corporations.
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah, and yeah, like I said, that's why I was also so surprised that the media was acting like this, especially in my own country. I mean, like I was shocked by this, and it brings you back like 70 years. Uh, it shouldn't happen like this, and the European community that were also the UK signed agreements with, they should be on the front lines of this, and the media, the large media, maybe not even the mainstream media, but we need to hear from them all speaking out for their own rights, and they don't even have to like Assange, because that's the thing. The the Americans and the Swedish and the British, they've smeared Assange so bad, but it is all about a person, and this person really, as a person, is not what matters most. It is about that what he represents, and that is the press freedom. And uh, if you make, you can argue like, do you really hate a person that? If you really hate a person, are you going to let this person be like the person that ends press freedom? Are you going to make whatever happens to him be the end of press freedom? Are you going to allow this? Is this what really matters to you? Like, do you hate a person that much? Because I don't think so. I think your freedoms matter far more, and that is what you have to defend, of course. Yeah.
In the same regard, though, I would say, look into the smears against Julian Assange and decide for yourself, because he was smeared falsely as a pedophile during the 2016 election by the CIA. They actually had a company, it was called Todd and Claire, and they ran this front company, and it was a fake dating website, and they tried saying that Assange was a pedophile using this website. Um, there's also the fact of the rape case, or I'm sorry, not the rape case, the allegations that were in Sweden, where basically the text messages exonerate Assange. You can look at the text message they were released. Um, so
Yeah, all he knows is all of these smears turned out to be lies, and what really matters is they did everything to make him look bad, because they want to make press freedom look bad. Pretty much it. So, but it doesn't matter. What matters is
If,
journalism is on trial in this case. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, there's a nice little list of all the um, responses that ordinary people can give if you encounter people smearing Julian. And I would encourage people, don't repeat the smears, don't, because what people remember is the smears. They don't remember what happened, what the truth is. And people can be very selective about what they hear. And maybe some of us on this group are much more switched on about what's really going on, but the vast majority of people are struggling to live their daily lives, and so they remember a few things, and if you always associate Assange with the negative ideas, then it doesn't work. I think it's important to reiterate that WikiLeaks did a wonderful service to humanity by allowing whistleblowers to anonymously provide evidence of crimes in vast volumes. Until then, many people knew all these things were happening. Many journalists who were on the ground, say in Iraq or Afghanistan, knew what was going on, but they didn't have the volume of evidence that WikiLeaks has provided. And it is this evidence that makes WikiLeaks and what Julian did special and important. And that's what makes Julian deserving of, I believe he has been nominated along with Chelsea and Edward Snowden for the Nobel Peace Prize. Because had it not been for what Julian did, we would still be, having wars in Iraq and elsewhere. Because he made it obvious and much more difficult for people to deny what was happening by providing the evidence in a very clear and unfiltered way, because most of the mainstream media, they give you the evidence, but then they wrap it up in all kinds of explanations. Oh, we killed some terrorists. Oh, well, they were counter-insurgents. But these kinds of things, when you see the actual evidence from WikiLeaks, the collateral murder video, you know who's committing the war crimes. And it is those people who deserve punishment, not Julian.
Um, no, you're completely right. The thing is, some of these smears we sometimes repeat because these exact same smears have been used against some other activists and internet freedom fighters, so to speak. Like the similar smears were used against, for example, the creator of the Tor system, the Tor browser. Uh, some of among anonymous activists have been facing similar smears. Um, so that is why for some listeners it also matters that we sometimes mention this, just that they seem to be using a similar protocol against people. Against like enemies of the state, they use like similar protocols. It's always the
all
same
right,
type of smears. It's not something else. It's not like you eat too much or whatever. It's just the same type of
too much.
smears. Yeah, yeah. There seems to be like a protocol, like a black book for it.
Yeah, yeah. Also, Snowden released the JTrig book. So online, it's very well known that there's trolls online that are paid to disrupt and um, uh, also cause chaos, and in addition to spread rumors about people, and all types of stuff.
Yeah, well, you know what works in America, for example, is like the whole the Russian story, right? Call someone a Russian, and the Red Scare jumps in right away. People remember that. Like Deepa, we shouldn't even talk about this, but that is what they do. That jump, that is like almost like subconscious. It is like embedded in their minds already. It's a very powerful strategy to use. As any government you just mentioned, they are part of your worst enemy government, so to speak, and it works. Like people don't research it; they just believe you for some reason. But uh,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I'm sorry, we shouldn't even.
It's okay. No, no, go for it. I, I think I'm going to drop off if that's okay, and unless you have some questions for me.
Um, I do have one question,
Okay,
and
go
that
for
is
it.
what
Sorry.
when you were in around Belmarsh.
Mm.
What did you think about the whole turnout with the activists?
I went on day one. The turnout was huge because there was a whole bunch of them inside, and outside it was pretty big too. I think my understanding is on later days it has been less heavy, but you can imagine it's a working week. It's um, very cold and very wet here. I'm myself an activist, so I have been on the picket lines in a different place. So it's very it's cold and miserable and windy. So it's difficult for people to be there, but there is a wonderful bunch of core supporters who are still standing there, standing strong, and people are visiting on different days. Maybe they can't go every day; they go on different days to offer solidarity and to hear what is going on. A lot of people are following what Craig is saying. Craig and Mark are both offering very interesting evidence. So please, Craig Murray and Mark Curtis. So I think in terms of the supporters, there are a lot of people who are either there in person or in spirit. So it's very difficult outside Belmarsh, right? It's not, you can't even get a cup of tea unless you're inside the gates and able to access the visitor center. You can't use the toilet. It's not easy. But our grassroots supporters have offered some um, food and drink and made it easy for people to participate. So I think the grassroots supporter group, the Committee for the Defense of Julian Assange, we should all be very grateful to them for getting everything ready, supporting the people, helping those who come early. Wonderful, wonderful activism, and they've been outside the embassy since 2010 or whenever it was. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is why I was asking. Because I know the Zita Johns also came there, the Yellow Vests. Um,
Yes, they came on the first day. It was excellent, and the French really have a wonderful, wonderful sense of solidarity. It's just amazing to watch. For example, when they were pushing the gates, the Gilets jaunes were up in front saying, "Okay, let's sit in. Let's make sure they don't close the gates." And they are so courageous, as we can see in what's happening in Paris. They don't take this nonsense. They don't accept the rules created by other people. They understand what true justice is about and what true solidarity is about. So hats off to them for coming all that distance. And this is not the first time they're coming. This is, I think, 6 or 7 times some of them have come so far, and they are wonderful. They are wonderful.
yeah, and this is also why I was asking it, because a listener should realize that they are not alone. If it's not unique when you're not alone when you support Julian Assange. The support is growing. There's people all over the world in support for Assange and for press freedom now, and uh, we are increasing in numbers. And it really helps if you also inform your friends and family about what is going on, because we're in the end we're not going to lose this, but we
Yeah.
do need to actually build a big resistance against this, because this is probably the most important case in our generation at least. And so you have to know that people even from France are going there because they know, like, see, that's Jans, they've been censored on media. Media has not been friendly about them, saying uh, their numbers are getting smaller, the protests are weakening. It's not true. It's becoming larger each time, and they are not going to stop protesting. And the Ziladians are the perfect example. They understand what is going on, and they're not scared of the system anymore, because the government in their own country, in France, has not been treating them well. They've
Yeah.
not
I
given them.
think,
Go ahead.
yeah, I was going to say, I think ordinary working class people understand what it's like to be stitched up because they have always been at the hard end, at the harsh end of the system. It is the supposed pseudo intellectuals at the top who have all kinds of different excuses for not having the courage to stand by free speech and freedom of, the fair trials in court. Oh, well, maybe certain don't deserve those protections. No, we all do. We all deserve those protections. I would urge you, if you have any friends and contacts, to get them to read an interview with Professor Neil Smeltzer, the UN rapporteur on torture, who was at one point of time a doubter, just like some of our friends and colleagues are. And he explains what made him change his mind, and maybe it will help you to encourage them to change their mind. And if you give an interview, maybe it's not so scary as when you give a big article. Maybe Niels Weltz's report, if you give them, people will be a bit daunted. But if you give them a short interview in a newspaper, maybe people will change their minds and understand what's really going on. So I know this. You are trying to share this online, Mark. Um, so please do use it if you're listening.
Yeah, and the article you just posted, will also share it everywhere on social media. Um, yeah,
Thank you.
like you said, like, free speech needs to be defended. I mean, if you don't defend free speech for the people you hate, you don't agree with, you're not defending free speech at all, right? I mean, you're just defending your own speech or the status quo. So
Yeah.
it matters. It matters to continue.
Yeah, and it's not like what he's saying in his free speech is fascist. It's not like what he's saying in his free speech is inciting some great bad sentiment. What he's saying in his free speech is actually just publishing what really happened. It's just evidence. It's not even his opinion. So it's not him having the free speech to denigrate somebody or to change the rights of somebody else. He's just saying this. He's just making available to us what has actually already happened.
Yeah, he's challenging the official narrative. Um,
Absolutely.
that's where they want him, because he's challenging the official narrative. And what you said earlier, how WikiLeaks kind of stopped the wars in the Middle East. I highly agree with you on that. When the publications happened, I remember that it kind of spurred the anti-war protests that we saw happen in the U.S. So I think without Chelsea Manning and Julian Assange publishing those documents on Iraq and Afghanistan, you know, I don't think that the wars in the Middle East would have slowed down, and we would have been into another war in another country, like how General Wesley Clark said a week after 9/11. He said that they had a plan to invade 7 countries within 5 years, and I think Chelsea Manning and Assange kind of put that plot to a halt. And I think that the elite establishment and the military-industrial complex wants Assange because he ruined their plans, essentially, and is ruining their plans and exposing all types of criminal behavior criminal behavior within the government, from financing terrorism to money laundering. WikiLeaks has exposed so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what journalists should do. I mean, you hold the people in power accountable, and yeah, that's exactly what he did. What all journalists should do, and they failed to do it. WikiLeaks did it, and that's why they're now on the front lines. Now, yeah, Deepa, I know you have to go, so
I mean, we can, if there is anything people want to chat about, my knowledge is pretty limited, so I'm happy to talk about a couple of things, but that's about it.
I
No,
should.
you did an amazing job.
Thank you.
Yeah, I should mention where people can find you, and your Twitter would be the best, right?
Yes, please, at the rate Deepa_driver.
Yeah, and so people should follow you, and they will get at least some reliable information about this whole situation. Because information is everywhere, but
Yeah,
reliable information is not always available.
thank you. That's kind of you to say. So I tend to get my information from the people I admire, people like John Pilger, Craig Murray, Mark Curtis, um, people like Piers Robinson and David Miller, who offer insightful opinions, and a lot of other interesting and well regarded sources, but generally critical sources. And I share them via my Twitter profile. Please feel free to follow me. And I'm not an expert. I'm a grassroots activist like you, and I'm just trying to understand what's going on. And I want to help change this world and help, importantly now, free Julian Assange.
Thank you very much for being with us. It's very much appreciated, and I do want to ask you that you can come back whenever you want and have some
I'd
information.
love to.
Okay, okay.
I'd love to. I'd love to. Thank you so much for having me. And I'll now have to work out how to hang up because this is the first time I'm using this software. But thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your discussion.
Okay.
Bye.
Talk soon. Okay, yeah, well, we can continue. Like, I mean, it's up to you.
Yeah, we could definitely continue and talk about the egregious, outrageous show trial that's going on with Julian Assange and all of the abuses that have been going on. Like I am mind blown that all of this is happening to one man. Like that could be me. That could be anybody else who is a independent journalist. That's what you need to realize is that it could be you. It could be you, even if you're not a journalist. You know, like fuck. I have no words. Like
A second. No, no, no. It is. It's just what all the stuff that's been happening over the last few days. Like really shocked me. Like how they've been treating him again. Like who's going to handcuff a guy 11 times? And who's going to put him like in some box that we can't even listen to his own fucking hearing? This is what kind of stuff is going on? This is a journalist. This is not like a
that's
serial killer.
yeah, right. That's what's insane. You know, put somebody in a fucking box. Are you kidding me? Like, are you serious? Like, what is this? What are we witnessing? Why is somebody being put in a fucking box? You know that could set a fucking precedent too. You know, we could end up now like having people who are targets of the state put into a box and not allowed to even hear their own hearing. Like, what is going on? People, holy shit, wake up and realize what is happening to our rights and the justice system. This is the UK law. It's insane.
Yeah, like where I always think like how did it ever get this far, right? Because it's like it sneaked in or
Absolutely.
something. Like suddenly it happened. Like when did this whole switch happen? Like we used to be able to hold people in power accountable. I mean, even presidents were removed from office, and now we're at the moment like there's an entire surveillance system. There's like internet censorship. There's like censorship everywhere. The mainstream media is suddenly on the side of the people in power, and the law system seems completely corrupted suddenly.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, you have to understand the deep level of this corruption is that people know, like the judge for Julian Assange's case, right? The judge's husband was a MI5 person at one point in time. So you have to understand from things like that, right? You have to understand that the level of corruption here, it breeds. It goes from one person to the next, and it's basically just these people are friends, and they have friends in power, and they don't do anything. It happens in the U.S. too. Like there's people who won't get prosecuted for crimes because they know people, and they get off like without any type of criminal indictment. It's absolute insanity. It's corruption of justice, and justice is dead. And then we have these rigged trials, like what's happening with Julian Assange.
Hey, so I wonder, should we talk about that stuff that happened with Cassandra?
Yeah, we could. Yeah, we could jump into that too, because that's another insane thing that's going on. How Cass kind of got herself into this, but I think what she did is very, very brave, and I don't really care what anybody says about me supporting that act of hers, because what she did was brave, and she put herself on the line, and she's now, in my opinion, she's a target for whatever, like the intelligence services have all types of different ways to get back at somebody, and it's like, um, when you put yourself out there, that's bravery. I don't care. Like, I don't care about her politics or anything. Like, if she's standing for Julian Assange and she's a friend with Assange, if you don't like Cass, that's fine. But in regards to um, what she does, you have to give her credit where credit's due.
Of course, and really the political side should no longer matter on this, because this is not a partisan issue, and she can vote for whatever she wants. She can support whatever she wants, but free press matters for both sides. So if you're a lefty or a right winger, you're in the same box, like literally, you're in the same boat together.
Yeah, yeah. So to give our listeners a little bit more background, Cassandra Fairbanks, she leaked two phone calls that she had with a guy named Arthur. I won't drop his last name because I'm not looking for fucking feds to come after me or anything else. But anyway, Arthur and the other guy was Rick Grinnell. I will drop his name, but Rick Grinnell basically is the guy who was involved in the arrest warrant to get Assange arrested in the embassy, according to Cassandra's leaked phone calls. And this guy Arthur discusses in the phone calls and tells Cass, tries to like brainwash her in a sense, saying that that Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning's leaks have killed people, and that they should both be injected with poison and this and that, and like he goes in this like insane rant. Like you got to listen to the phone calls yourself and actually hear what this guy says. But you know what she did was she proved that this is political in nature, because of those leaked phone calls. So, you know, if that doesn't stop Julian Assange's extradition, I'm not sure what will. And if it doesn't stop it, then it's obvious that it's a rigged trial, because it's blatantly obvious that it's a political matter.
Yeah, at this point, it's pretty much proven that it is a political matter,
Yeah.
and and that is why I think what Cassandra did was very important, because she showed it that it was,
Yeah.
and that this is the proof that we actually need to possibly be able to stop this extradition. Because the judge was saying like, yeah, I don't know if this is a political issue. I don't know if it's a political matter, but the exception is specifically for political matters, and that is the strongest thing we have right now. Now, the extradition treaty directly doesn't say that political prisoners can't be extradited at all, but the extradition treaty says that all prisoners must be extradited except for political prisoners. There is the exception, and for political prisoners, then there has to be a decision made about that. Like it has to be like deciding on the circumstances, on the specific circumstances. But like all criminals have to be extradited. Standard. So and then we have so for the extradition thing for political prisoners, they have to decide per case. And then we have the UK signing other agreements, like with the European Human Rights Council, the EHRC, and that there are that they do have like exceptions for political prisoners, and so we're dealing with a situation that pretty much the lower judge now has to decide, but should they decide against us, then of course Assange can do an appeal and go into appeal, and it might take years and years for this to finish. But in the meantime, we have to put pressure on this government, on this
Yeah.
UK justice system. Yeah. Yeah, so I just want to make clear because we several sources have been posting that it is impossible to extradite for political things. Now there is an exception that you're not forced to extradite. So that's why it matters that there is pressure. So it matters that journalists and other lawyers and professors who are educated into this, that they speak out about this to actually educate people on the implications, on the consequences of what happens when this actually would succeed, when they would be able to extradite him.
Right. And that's it's very important to note, that they can extradite him, even if it's a political matter. And if they do, it'll be obvious that it was just a deal that was made and that there was no trial. It was just a show for the public. And at that point, it sets a precedent. It really does set a precedent in the judicial system as well. So you have human rights where a precedent will be set where now the government and governments can spy on an individual in asylum, which is absolute insanity. And then you have the judicial that'll be setting a precedent, and you'll be setting a precedent for journalism. So I mean, fuck people, if you don't realize how big this is, I don't know what else to say.
No, exactly. Um, I was happy to see, by the way, that my friend Matthijs from the Dutch Pirate Party actually spoke out for this too today. The Dutch Pirate Party. Very happy to see that. Because I saw in my own country the protests were not really big yet. Like it was like 5, 6 people at the last Saturday. No political support, of course. Socialist Party did ask questions in the past. The government just pushed them away and said like, yeah, we're not mingling into UK affairs. It's not our stuff. They were like holding their hands up, like we're not touching this with a 10-foot pole, right? And now I'm happy that next to the Socialist Party, now also the Pirate Party is speaking up. So
Yeah.
yeah, that is the Pirate Party is of course in the European Union are the Greens and the Independents, and a pretty big representation in the European Parliament. So it is starting.
Yeah, it definitely is starting where we're starting to see more and more people realizing what's going on and also supporting Julian Assange. But we need a we need a larger mass of people now, not later. So, we have to prevent this extradition. If we don't, then it's all of our other rights at risk. You know, it's a crazy precedent. Like I said, I just listed three different things that would be a precedent, and having somebody in a box in trial, or I'm sorry, not trial, in a hearing is absolute insanity. Um, that's literally taking away somebody's human rights. Oh, you can't listen to your hearing. You have to be in a box. The fuck?
You go grab your water. Okay.
Yeah, I'll be back.
Yeah, like Kay says, that they put him in a box, and it's not only an insult to a guy like him, and it is not only like so denigrating to a guy like him. It is also showing all other journalists like this is how we will treat you if you talk about us. This is how you will be treated when we get a hold of you. If you uh, publish about war crimes the United States commits in an independent country like Iraq. You show the world that we actually kill civilians and Reuters journalists. This is what's going to happen to you, and only for publishing, because that's all Assange did. He only published. Whatever other whistleblowers or people do, they deliver the files to WikiLeaks. It is not that Assange goes in and extracts all these files himself. No, they have a system called Secure Drop, and you can just drop files in it, and the journalists from WikiLeaks will then like verify these files and like see like how reliable is this, and then they publish it. So this is like they only do their journalistic job what any self-respecting newspaper should be doing, but they're not doing it anymore. So that is why suddenly their work becomes unique or only almost absurd in this time. But while it is actually the work all press should do. Like in the past, like we have press, the journalists would infiltrate like mafia, for example, or they would infiltrate like corrupt big businesses. They would infiltrate these places, and they would then write their stories about this, and it would be like a breaking, shocking story inside the mafia, and now everything exposed. Right? That was what you would read in a newspaper or something, and it would be not only nice to read it, but it would also be like reality. Like you would read the real stuff. And now
Yeah.
we're at the point like journalists have to be afraid of what they're saying. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. Literally, investigative journalism is dead. With the internet, people, if you don't realize it by now, um, a lot of these journalists online, they literally copy paste other journalists' words into their own article.
yeah, what
Maybe reword
Deepa
a little
does.
bit of things here and there, right? But it's like copy pasted propaganda, and at this point, the CIA could put out one fake news article, and then all of a sudden, everybody else would just copy paste what they said, and it would be all around the internet within like a matter of 24 hours. But yeah, it's absolute insanity. I just came back when you were speaking about how journalists used to infiltrate various different organizations and write about them. If we have a precedent on journalism freedom from the Espionage Act, right? That's going to drastically change what journalists will write about. And if you're not having journalists expose corruption within government, that's tyranny. Like that's absolute tyranny.
Yeah, of course. But it's also like, what if you're a good journalist and you infiltrate like the mafia in like whatever, like in Florida or something. You infiltrate the mafia, and suddenly at some table you see like a high level politician. Do you have to like run away because you can't talk about this high level politician? Because then you'll be extradited and put in a little box in Belmarsh.
Well, in that regard, I think you'd be more fearful of being killed than being put
Yeah,
into a
exactly.
box.
Bad
Like
example,
you'd be
maybe,
put
but
into a different box. You'd be put into a coffin.
mm,
So I mean, and that has happened before. Danny Casolaro was exposing high level, um, high level crime that was connected to the mafia, and he ended up having his wrist slit and put in a bathtub. But the thing is, the there was an autopsy done, and there was poison that was in his spine. They injected him with some type of poison, and according to um, a high level source that talked to one of my sources, they said that Danny Casolaro was killed with a special poison, and the poison actually linked back to the military. So yeah, they've in the past the military has assassinated journalists. It's not a secret. There's other cases of journalists where they were just mysteriously killed, and we could go down the list of different journalists. And
oh, I
they
don't
have
doubt
all
it.
types of ways. They have all types of ways to kill journalists. Like in general, they can assassinate people in numerous different ways now. They have direct energy weapons. They have poisons. They have all types of different things where they can kill somebody.
Of course, and I don't doubt that they're actually doing that, but like there is a difference. Like they had to up to now they had to do this in secret, but now they do this
Yeah.
in public, and they actually like the media is on their side, the justice system is on their side, and like the journalist who is on their side, who is on the side of free press.
In regards to that, we had Julian Assange's lawyer say that they were plotting to kidnap him and potentially kill him. Um, the CIA was plotting with UC Global. So, with that, that should be a big wake up call to say, okay, hold up. The dark state or deep state, whatever you wish to call them, within intelligence that isn't accountable to anybody, right? They or had attempted to do this plot to kill Assange, and the fact is that Assange actually had intruders multiple times climb up his balcony and try to get into his room. Was that connected to this plot? We don't know. There's no evidence to suggest that, but is the potential there? Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, and we discussed it in previous episodes too. Now, like now, maybe this is not a good episode to now start about the whole virus thing again, but like
No,
forget
yeah,
yeah.
I would love to jump into that
Yeah, I mean, like,
in the episode later on tonight for sure. There's
yeah,
there's a lot going on,
yeah, we have to wrap
but
the show too at like 3.5 hours.
yeah.
No, I was just looking to mention it because now we're like facing like a possible pandemic. It could happen. Then,
Oh, it's already pandemic level. I've already talked about it. It's already at pandemic level. That's the reason why I don't want to get into that on this episode. But anyway, that's the reason why the stock market just crashed
yeah,
1,200 points, which is historic.
it's the
And,
Dow
and, and
Jones, right? Was crashing like 1,200 points.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a historic thing, and then the reason why is because the pandemic was declared, and Wall Street already knows about it. And the sell-offs are just going to continue in that regard, and um, yeah, it's gonna be ugly for the stock markets, in my opinion. I'm on top of all of that stuff, but I just want to stick onto Assange for this episode, and then we can end it, and then later on tonight we can get into the coronavirus stuff because yeah, it's a pandemic level,
Yeah,
and there's a lot of stuff going on right now.
the reason why I was mentioning it is because like during a possible pandemic here in like in other areas where it's not not so active yet, it matters even more that we have a free press, right? We need reliable reporting about this. Like if something happens, like we need to know that what is told to us is the truth. We need citizen journalists, we need reporters, investigators, real people on the ground. And if they're too scared because possible like consequences with governments, like we can't say this, we can't say that because this may be a secret or whatever, and we choose the government secrets over the well-being of the normal people, then we could be facing far bigger problems. Like, imagine that there is like in a big city like Berlin or Amsterdam or something, there is like there are already like cases, but the government will not allow to report it. For example, I'm just this is just hypothetical, and the government will not allow to report it because they don't want people to be scared. But there is actually an outbreak in a city like that, and you're actually at risk when you're walking there, right?
Yeah, right.
But you're not getting the information because the journalists are scared. They're scared to be be put into Belmarsh or whatever, right? So, and this is one example of what we will be facing if we don't have reliable journalism. Like, we need.
Well,
Go
I'll
on.
say in regards to that, there's people that have been imprisoned in other countries where they now have fake news councils where they decide if something is fake news or not, or a rumor, and if it is, then you can get locked up and jailed for 5 years. Um, Within Malaysia and India, I think it is. I believe it's India, where the other country is. No, Thailand. It was Thailand and Malaysia where they were. They introduced these fake news councils, and they're now locking people up for spreading information on the coronavirus that they consider to be fake news. Absolute insanity.
Yeah, I see that's a good example because uh,
Yeah, it's a good example of um, the 1984 becoming our reality. You know, like the Ministry of Truth. There's your Ministry of Truth starting to come in, and then in the same regard, you have Facebook doing the same thing, suppressing information from getting out. You have the World Health Organization calling on social media companies to prevent information from getting out.
yeah,
It's crazy. It's absolute crazy, and it's really a danger to everybody.
yeah. But I think the whole Orwellian story about thought crime is already a reality too. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, because like as a journalist now, when you're like so you're reporting on something and you're thinking about publishing, the thought crime is you will already censor yourself because this is a
Yeah.
not allowed thought. You're not allowed to publish because you will
Yep.
end up somewhere.
Especially on Facebook with their new fact checkers and everything. You know, these guys, they're complete idiots that can't even research and look up basic like facts. You know, like oh my god, where we've walked ourselves is a nightmare. I can't I can't even write about certain topics anymore. You know why? Fact checkers on Facebook because they will flag our account, get our account suspended, and then that's it for our news organization. It's absolute insanity.
Yeah.
You know, we're censoring ourselves, like you said. Um,
Yeah, but
it's
I do,
crazy.
I do the same already. Like on Twitter, when I post, I already censor myself because I know I can't post certain things because I will be literally removed from Twitter. And sometimes you even message me like, look out with what you're posting there because either you will like be like banned or you will lose your account, which is true.
Yeah, I got your back on that regard. And on that note, you know, I think Twitter has completely censored my account again because um, I've been posting and I've gotten like one favorite or one retweet here and there without posting in any groups or anything. Like it's almost like, and people are telling me like I'm not showing up in their feeds or anything again. So I'm like, oh great, well Twitter is censoring me again. It's not a surprise. I mean, they did it before, but in that regard, you know, if you speak out on too many topics, if you say too much that goes against the quote unquote official narrative. If you use your brain and dare to think about anything, right? You're a target, and you will be put into a shadow banned box. It might not be as bad as what's happening to Julian, but you'll be put into your own little world, and people won't be able to hear you as you scream. You know, like
Hmm. Yeah, and I already I saw it happening with our previous episode with the Rico Brouwer in it too. So we're sharing this episode, right? And it was shared about 100 times, and it was on 3,300 views. Then a few hours later, it was shared over 250 times, and was still on 3,300 views. So I messaged Rico. I said, "It's pretty much impossible. Like, how can it 150 new people share this, but the view count is not going up?" So we
yeah, that's another like little tactic they use to censor. And you know, God willing, and I don't really believe in God, but anyway, I'm hoping that what I'm doing behind the scenes and working with different people is going to provide a way to kind of force these big companies to stop doing this type of shadow banning. Um, in that regard, so
yeah, well, as long as people are actually able to click and watch it, then I'm still not concerned about it, about what numbers show up, as long as they actually do see it and the numbers are totally different. But it's obvious they are messing with it. So yeah,
yeah, it's not only that they're messing with numbers, though they're also messing with the algorithm, so it won't show up. Um,
yeah, that's
like,
probably it.
they're doing all types of different like techniques to suppress videos and audio. It's really pathetic, to be honest.
Yeah, they don't want it to go trending. I think that's why they mess with the numbers. They artificially keep it low so you don't show up like with trending accounts or something.
Yeah,
Like I know they did this in the past on Facebook when we were still streaming. They like you had a whole world map of live streams, and you could actually it was like a very handy map. You could all see all the different streams about a subject, and it would show like circles. And the more listeners a stream had, the
yeah.
bigger the circle was. And we would never show up on this map, even though we had like huge numbers of viewers back then. Like
I think they did away with that map because of the people that were posting like mass shootings on Facebook. Like people like people find a way to ruin whatever it is. Like, and in that regard, the fact that anybody would think that in their head that I'm gonna go on a mass shooting spree. Let me live stream it. You're a fucking sick fuck.
yeah, of
Um,
course.
but
Yeah. Okay. Well, it also gives you hope in some way. They must be getting scared of us, right? I mean, why else would they do it? Like, someone sends them a message like, censor these people. They're so scary and dangerous. Like, yeah.
yeah, yeah, it gives you a little bit of hope for sure. The fact that people get censored, and at the same time we're able to break through those censorship barriers. It's like it definitely gives you a little bit of hope for sure. And in that regard, I think that we should end this show before we go into another topic that's not
Yeah.
Assange.
Okay. That's a good idea. And for listeners, if you're on Twitter or other social media, use the hashtag FreeAssange. I want to
No
advise.
Julian for US as well.
Yeah, so these two, the Free Assange and No Julian for US. I want to advise to use these ones. They are used by pretty much all of us activists, and because this subject is being targeted now by the corrupt mainstream media, and they are broadcasting the weirdest stuff ever. So narratives that have been proven to be untrue for a long time, they're still pushing this, and politicians saying the weirdest stuff ever, and just focus on on these hashtags, because we're all working hard to get the truth out. And as you probably heard tonight too, we have people in these shows too who actually are on the ground there, who are busy with this every single day, and who only give unbiased real information. They're not political or whatever. They're only giving the truth about this. And yeah,
Oh, we also have the WikiLeaks truck, or the presumed new WikiLeaks truck. The billboards. I've been tweeting out pictures that somebody's been giving me um, on the ground in London.
yeah. Yeah, okay, and as I mentioned, please help I mentioned it at the start. Please help to share, because we're dealing with the whole shadow banning stuff, and so appreciate all the shares. You guys are literally giving the power to these independent voices. So please share, and thanks for listening. We'll be back in 3 hours and 11 minutes with the regular USA episode. And
Which will be very fun because we're going to get into all the coronavirus stuff and some inside information.
okay, oh, that's nice. And we also have on Sunday, I think we have a guest in from India. I'm not sure what it will be about, but it will be also kind of a shocking episode. I'm sure I'll hear more about it soon, but it will be the announced by back Asia episodes. So, okay, well, thanks again for listening. In 3 hours, 11 minutes, we go live again. We'll hear back from you then. You'll hear back from us too.